The early morning sun filtered gently through the half-open window, casting soft golden streaks across the small kitchen. Tu Tieu stood quietly in front of the oven, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the temperature. The scent of butter and flour wafted through the air, comforting and nostalgic, like a childhood memory she couldn't quite place. After years of drifting, of jobs that didn't fit and places that didn't feel like home, Tu Tieu had finally decided to stop running. This time, she would create something of her own, a bakery, not just of sweets, but of dreams she once buried deep in her heart. She called it Team Bon No Ben No No, the little bakery down the lane. It was quaint, with a blue-painted door and hand-sewn curtains. But what made it special wasn't the appearance. It was what she hoped to build inside. Each recipe she used wasn't just a random blend of ingredients, it was a piece of a memory, something her mother once made, something her grandmother whispered in her ear while kneading dough together. Even though she hadn't seen her mother in over 20 years, Tu Tieu still remembered the way her mother's hands moved, quick but gentle, always with care. But there were questions that never stopped echoing in her heart. Why had her mother left? Where had she gone? And more importantly, why did no one in the family ever talk about it? She never got a clear answer. All she had was a single letter, long faded and half-burnt at the edge, hidden in the back of her grandmother's old recipe book. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was her mother's. The letter didn't say much, only a few cryptic lines. "Forgive me, my little girl. I had no choice. One day, when you're old enough to understand, you'll find the truth in the flour, in the sugar, and in the silence of the kitchen we once shared." That was all. And yet, it was enough to ignite something in Tu Tieu, a hope, however faint, that her mother hadn't forgotten her. So she began baking. Not just for business, but for healing. Every cupcake, every tart, every loaf of bread was part of her search, not just for customers, but for herself, and for the woman she had lost. Each day brought someone new to the shop, locals curious about the quiet girl who rarely smiled but whose pastries felt like home. There was Mrs. Lean, who came in every morning for almond cookies that reminded her of her late husband. There was the schoolteacher, Mr. Bao, who swore her sponge cake tasted exactly like his mother's. And there was an old man who sat by the window each Friday, sipping tea and watching her work in silence. Tu Tieu didn't talk much. But the way she handed over the paper bags, the way her eyes softened when someone complimented her baking, it said everything. Her heart was in her work. Still, there were nights when she would stay behind after closing, staring at the old letter. She'd wonder if she was foolish to keep hoping. If her mother really wanted to be found, wouldn't she have reached out? But deep down, something told her, this journey wasn't over yet. And she was right. Weeks passed. The bakery was slowly becoming a familiar haven for the neighborhood. Children stopped by after school for a slice of sponge cake. Couples came on rainy afternoons to share a warm croissant and tea. For the first time in a long time, Tu Tieu felt like she belonged. But the sense of peace never lasted long. Every time she stood in the quiet of the kitchen, memories returned, some sweet, others aching. Her mother's laughter, soft and distant. Her touch. The scent of vanilla that clung to her aprons. And then, just silence. One late afternoon, as she was reorganizing old recipe books, a small yellowing envelope slipped from between the pages. It was unfamiliar. No name. No stamp. Just an old wax seal, cracked and faded. Her heart raced as she opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper with 3 lines. The apricot jam was always your favorite. Look where we once laughed under the lanterns. Not all doors stay locked forever. She sat frozen, holding the note. The handwriting was familiar again, graceful, like the first letter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she whispered to herself, "It's her. It's really her." What did it mean? The place where we once laughed under the lanterns. She closed her eyes and searched her memories. Lanterns. Lanterns. Suddenly it hit her. When she was about 6, her mother had taken her to a mid-autumn festival in the countryside. There was a small tea house near a hill, filled with paper lanterns hanging from trees, gently swaying in the wind. They had shared a tart made from apricots and honey, and she remembered laughing so hard she dropped the plate. Could that be the place? The next morning, she closed the bakery early. With nothing but the note, a small notebook, and the faint map in her memory, she boarded a bus toward the countryside. The village had changed. It was quieter now, with more fields and fewer children running around. But the tea house was still there, abandoned, but not forgotten. She walked through the wooden doors, the hinges creaking as if waking from a long sleep. Dust coated the floor. The scent of time lingered in the air. But on the old counter, someone had left something. A small jar of apricot jam, sealed tightly, sitting on a faded red cloth. Tied to it was a note. You remembered. I knew you would. Tu Tieu clutched the jar to her chest. Her eyes stung. Was she being watched? Was this a game? Or a trail? That evening, she stayed in a small guest house. The jam untouched. Her mind racing. If this was her mother's doing, she wasn't far. But why the riddles? Why now? She opened her notebook and began writing. Not recipes this time, but questions. And hopes. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that the woman she missed every day might still be out there, trying to reach her. Back in the bakery days later, Tu Tieu noticed a woman in a gray coat standing across the street. The woman didn't enter. Just stood there. Watching. And then she left. But something about her silhouette felt familiar. The next morning, a small package was left at the bakery's door. No address. Just a brown envelope, inside of which was an old photo, Tu Tieu as a baby, sleeping in her mother's arms. Behind it, scribbled in the corner, was a single word. Forgive. The photo lingered in her hands long after the morning crowd had gone. Tu Tieu sat alone in the bakery, the only sounds coming from the ticking clock on the wall and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She had seen that photo before, years ago, tucked away in an old family album. But the word scrawled on the back this time, forgive, was never there. Her thoughts spiraled. Why now? Why after so many years of silence? What had her mother done that needed forgiving? She went to her room upstairs and pulled out a shoebox hidden beneath her bed. It was full of old family photos and letters, some written by her father, others by an aunt who had passed. There, she found a letter addressed to her but never opened. She recognized her aunt's handwriting. If the day comes that you begin searching for answers, you must know that not everything was your mother's fault. There were choices made to protect you, no matter how painful. Love sometimes hides in sacrifice. Tu Tieu's chest tightened. Had her mother really left to protect her? All her life, she had believed that she was abandoned, forgotten. But what if the truth was more complicated? That evening, as she was closing the bakery, the doorbell jingled. A man in his late 50s stepped inside. He had a kind but weathered face, and wore a scarf even though it wasn't particularly cold. I'm sorry to disturb, he said softly, but I think I knew your mother. Tu Tieu froze. Who are you? My name is Hong. I worked with your mother, many years ago. At the old hospital on the east side. She pulled out a chair and offered him tea. As the steam curled in the air, he began to tell her everything. Her mother had been a nurse, respected, quiet, always the last to leave. When Tu Tieu's father passed in an accident, everything in her world crumbled. She had debts, no family left to turn to, and a daughter to raise on her own. She tried. She tried harder than anyone knew. But one night, there was a fire in the hospital. A patient died. Her mother was blamed, unjustly, said Hong. The hospital buried the truth to avoid scandal. She was offered a choice: leave quietly and disappear, or face trial and risk losing custody of Tu Tieu. She chose to vanish, Hong said, voice thick with guilt. She thought disappearing was the only way to keep you safe. She arranged for your aunt to take you in. She watched from afar. Always. Tears slipped down Tu Tieu's cheeks. All this time, she was alive? Hong nodded. She was here, a few days ago. She asked me to tell you everything, if you were ready to know. Tu Tieu gripped her mug, heart pounding. Where is she now? She didn't say. But she left you something. From his coat, he pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. Tu Tieu opened it gently. Inside were pages filled with her mother's handwriting, recipes, little notes, dried flower petals, and entries that began with, "My dearest Tieu. I watched you from across the street on your first day at the bakery. You looked so much like me when I was young. I wanted to run to you, hold you, tell you everything. But I couldn't. Not yet. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But I have never stopped loving you. Not for a single second." She couldn't read more. Her tears blurred the words. That night, Tu Tieu sat on the floor of the bakery, surrounded by the scent of sugar and warm bread, and cried for the mother she had lost, twice. And still, somewhere in her heart, a tiny ember of hope remained. The next few days passed in a haze. Tu Tieu moved through the bakery like a shadow of herself, kneading dough with muscle memory, greeting customers with soft smiles that never reached her eyes. Her body was present, but her heart and mind were elsewhere, lost in the pages of her mother's journal. Every night, she would light a candle and read a few more lines. I watched you grow from afar. Each year on your birthday, I sent a prayer into the wind. I wanted nothing more than to hold you, but I feared you'd look into my eyes and see only a stranger, or worse, the woman who left. Each entry peeled back the layers of a mother's aching love, one that had been forced into silence. The notebook ended with a final line. If one day you decide to forgive me, I'll be waiting, under the magnolia tree where I first held you in my arms. Tu Tieu closed the notebook slowly. She knew the place. The old park near the edge of town, where the magnolia trees bloomed in spring. She hadn't been there in years. The next morning, with trembling hands, she closed the bakery early and walked through the quiet streets. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the breeze was gentle, as if not to disturb what was coming. The park was mostly empty. Children's laughter echoed from far off, but she barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the line of magnolia trees, most of them now lush with green leaves. And then, there. A woman sat on the wooden bench beneath the oldest tree. Her back was slightly hunched, her gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She wore a light brown cardigan, hands folded in her lap, as still as stone. Tu Tieu stood frozen a few feet away. Her heart thundered so loudly, it drowned out the sounds around her. "Mom," she whispered. The woman turned slowly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, years of pain, confusion, and longing collided in a single breathless second. Tu Tieu took a hesitant step forward. "I wasn't sure you'd come," the woman said softly. Her voice was older, more fragile than Tu Tieu remembered, but unmistakable. "I almost didn't," Tu Tieu replied, her voice shaking. "I didn't know what to believe." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I never stopped loving you. Never. I only left so you could grow up without shame, without being tied to my mistakes. But I needed you," Tu Tieu choked out. "I needed a mother. Every birthday, every school event. I looked for you. In the crowd, in every stranger's face." The woman bowed her head. "And I was there. Always hiding in the background. Watching you grow. Wishing things could be different." They stood in silence, the magnolia petals drifting softly around them like confetti from the past. Then, without another word, Tu Tieu stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. At first, it was stiff, cautious. But then her mother held her tighter, like she was trying to hold together all the broken years. For a long time, they said nothing. Words couldn't carry what was being mended. Finally, her mother pulled away just enough to look into her eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" Tu Tieu wiped her tears. "I already have. That evening, they walked through the park like old friends reunited by fate. Her mother spoke of her quiet life in the countryside, of gardens and journals and letters never sent. Tu Tieu spoke of the bakery, of dreams she hadn't realized came from her mother's hands. When they reached the edge of the park, the sun was setting, casting a golden light over everything. For the first time in years, Tu Tieu felt whole. Not just a baker. Not just a girl with a missing piece. But a daughter, loved and found. Before they parted, her mother pressed a small, wrapped bundle into her hands. "It's your favorite. Chestnut mooncakes," she smiled. "The way you used to like them, with extra filling." Tu Tieu laughed through her tears. That night, she placed the mooncakes in the bakery's front display, with a handwritten sign. "Made from my mother's recipe. A taste of home, and the beginning of forgiveness."